Tonight, we're diving into the real Wild West. Not the Hollywood version with its heroic cowboys and dramatic showdowns, but the gritty, dangerous reality where survival was never guaranteed. You might think you're tough enough to handle it, but trust me, there's a reason they called it wild. It was a world of back-breaking labour, questionable water, and 1,000 ways to die before you ever reached middle age. So, before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see our little global community connect through these stories. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you've just woken up in the American West of the 1870s. The first challenge hits you before you even open your eyes. It's the smell. In the modern world, we are accustomed to the sterile scents of laundry detergent and climate-controlled air. But in 1875, the air inside your small, timber-framed cabin or sod house is a heavy, stagnant soup of human existence. It is the pungent aroma of unwashed wool, stale sweat, and the lingering, metallic tang of woodsmoke that has permeated every fibre of the room. There are no screen doors here, and during the night, the shutters were pulled tight to keep out the predators, both four-legged and two. The result is a room that hasn't seen a fresh breeze in weeks. As you attempt to take your first deep breath of the morning, you find yourself doubled over in a dry, hacking cough. The air is thick with fine dust from the dirt floor and the microscopic remains of wood ash. Your throat feels like it's been lined with sandpaper. This frontier cough isn't just an annoyance. It's a constant companion for anyone living in a one-room shack where the hearth is the only source of heat and light. You try to shift your weight, hoping to find a more comfortable position, but the bed beneath you offers no reprieve. In the 1870s, unless you are part of the thin sliver of the urban elite, your mattress isn't a cloud of memory foam. It is a tick, a coarse canvas bag stuffed to the bursting point with dried corn husks or wheat straw. As you move, the mattress lets out a loud rhythmic crunch that sounds like 1,000 dry leaves being crushed at once. It's lumpy, uneven, and has a way of poking sharp dried stalks through the fabric and into your ribs. But the discomfort of the straw is nothing compared to the inhabitants of the mattress. You feel a sharp itching sting on your ankle, then another on your neck. This is the bedbug reality of the Wild West. These mattresses are literal ecosystems. In an era before industrial pesticides, bedbugs, lice, and fleas were considered an inevitable part of life. They live deep within the straw, emerging in the dark to feast on anyone brave enough to lie down. By the time a raking light of dawn begins to peek through the cracks in the walls, your skin is a map of small, red welts. You look toward the small, bubbled glass window where the sun is just starting to crest the horizon. The light doesn't flood the room. It arrives in sharp, dusty shafts that highlight the chaos of your living space. You see a layer of fine grey silt covering everything. Your boots, your wash basin, the small wooden table. This is the dust of the plains, a relentless invader that no amount of sweeping can truly defeat. The silence of the morning is absolute, broken only by the distant, mournful lowing of cattle or the sharp crack of a dry branch in the wind. There are no hums of electricity, no distant roar of traffic. It is a silence that feels heavy, almost predatory. It reminds you that you are miles away from the nearest neighbour, and even further from anything resembling a doctor. You sit up, swinging your legs over the side of the bed. Your feet touch the floor, and you feel the biting chill of the earth. The fire in the hearth went out hours ago to save on precious fuel, and the temperature inside the cabin has dropped to match the high desert air outside. Your muscles are stiff. Your joints ache with a premature arthritis born of yesterday's labour. And your mouth is as dry as the landscape waiting for you outside the door. In the movies, the hero wakes up, splashes a bit of water on his face, and looks ready to take on an outlaw gang. But as you stand there in the dim, dusty light of 1875, you realise that simply waking up and surviving the night was the first victory of the day. Your body feels old before its time. Your skin is crawling with the reminders of your roommates in the straw, and the simple act of breathing is a struggle. The Wild West wasn't a playground for heroes. It was a grueling test of endurance that began the second you opened your eyes. And as you reach for your stiff, dirt-caked trousers, you realise that the day ahead is going to be much, much longer than you ever imagined. Standing there in the centre of your dim cabin, the itch from the bedbugs still prickling at your neck, you face the first great hurdle of the frontier, the wash basin. In the movies, the protagonist steps out to a picturesque pump, splashes cool, crystal clear water over a ruggedly handsome face, and emerges looking refreshed and ready for adventure. In the reality of 1875, the morning ritual is a grim negotiation with scarcity, filth, and deep-seated medical paranoia. The vibe of your morning is one of profound, inescapable grittiness. Your skin doesn't just feel dirty, it feels heavy. After weeks of travel or labour, a layer of fine alkali dust has bonded with the natural oils of your skin and the soot from the hearth, creating a greyish film that covers your arms, face, and chest. Your hair is a matted, greasy mess, likely housing its own inhabitants, and it clings to your scalp in a way that feels suffocating. You don't just want a shower, you ache for one. But in the Wild West, a shower is a technological marvel from a future you cannot yet imagine. You look at the small tin basin sitting on a rough-hewn wooden stand. Inside is about a quart of water left over from the night before. It is cold, and a thin skin of ice may have formed over the surface if the wind was particularly biting. This is your entire bathroom for the morning. You now have to make a choice that defines the frontier experience. Do you use this water to wash, or do you save it to drink? On the frontier, water is often more valuable than gold. If you are a settler on the high plains, your well might be a half-mile walk away. Or worse, your only source of water might be a communal creek that is shared with upstream cattle, horses, and the local tannery. Every gallon brought into the house represents back-breaking labour, hauled in heavy buckets that strain the shoulders and pull at the spine. To use a gallon of water just to rinse your skin is seen by many as a height of vanity and a dangerous waste of resources. This brings us to the monthly luxury. You might think that people were simply lazy, but the lack of bathing was rooted in the medical science of the time. In the 1870s, many people, including some doctors, still believed in the theory of miasma, or the idea that the pores of the skin were gates. They believed that by bathing too frequently, especially in hot water, You opened these pores and allowed pestilence and cold air to enter the body and rot the internal organs. For many frontier folk, a thick layer of honest dirt was seen as a protective barrier against disease. A full immersion bath was an event, often reserved for the change of seasons or a particularly important wedding. For the rest of the year, you lived in your own biological history. You reach for a small greyish slab of lye soap sitting next to the basin. This isn't the scented moisturising bar you know today. This is a harsh, caustic concoction made from rendered animal fat and wood ash. It smells like a slaughterhouse and stings like a hornet. If you use it on your face, it strips away the oils so aggressively that your skin cracks and bleeds in the dry prairie wind. Most people skip the soap entirely for the morning ritual, opting instead for a dry rub with a coarse piece of flannel to scrape away the worst of the grit. As for the myth of the clean-shaven cowboy, it is exactly that. Shaving in the Wild West was a dangerous, painful chore. You would be using a straight razor, a piece of carbon steel that required constant stropping on a leather belt to remain sharp. Without hot running water or lubricating creams, most men developed barber's itch, a painful, weeping staph infection of the hair follicles. Many chose to grow thick, bushy beards not for the fashion, but as a practical shield against the sun, the wind, and the sheer agony of a cold water shave. You dip your fingers into the basin. The water is hard and alkaline, feeling slimy against your skin because it refuses to lather. You splash a small amount onto your eyes to clear the crust of sleep and dust. Because water is so precious, you don't dump the basin when you're done. In a frontier household, that same quart of water might be used by 3 or 4 people. The father washes first, then the mother, then the children, each adding their own layer of grime to the stagnant pool until the water is a thick, grey sludge. This communal use of water is why frontier sore eyes, trachoma, and other skin infections spread like wildfire. You aren't just washing with water, you're washing with the collective bacteria of your entire family. As you dry your face with the towel that has been used for everything, from drying dishes to wiping sweat, you don't feel clean. You feel slightly less dusty, but the underlying layer of grease remains. Your teeth feel fuzzy, coated in the remains of last night's salt pork. There are no toothbrushes here. Perhaps just a chew stick made from a frayed twig of birch or willow that you rub against your gums until they bleed. Finally, you take a sip of the remaining water. It tastes of iron and earth, with a distinct flat quality that suggests it hasn't seen oxygen in a long time. It doesn't refresh you. It merely keeps the dehydration headache at bay for another hour. You stand up, your skin feeling tight and itchy, your hair heavy and matted under your hat. You haven't even stepped outside yet, but you are already exhausted by the sheer effort of maintenance. In the modern world, we start our day by washing away the night. In the Wild West, you simply carry the night with you into the day, a permanent companion of grit and grease that reminds you, with every movement, that you are part of the earth you are trying to tame. Your stomach lets out a hollow, demanding growl, cutting through the morning silence of the cabin. In the movies, this is the part where the scene cuts to a sizzling pan of thick-cut bacon, golden flapjacks dripping with syrup, and fresh eggs gathered from a picturesque coop. But as you turn toward the small iron stove or the open hearth, the vibe is far from a gourmet farmhouse breakfast. It is a scene of dietary monotony and nutritional desperation. Eating in 1875 isn't about flavor profiles or starting the day right. It is a mechanical process of shoveling enough calories into your system to keep your heart beating through 10 hours of physical toil. The air in the cabin shifts from the smell of stale sleep to something sharp, salty, and vaguely metallic. This is the scent of the frontier morning, the smell of salt pork fatigue. You reach for a wooden tin and pull out a biscuit. In the modern world, a biscuit is a fluffy, buttery cloud. In the Wild West, a biscuit, often called hardtack or soda bread, is closer to a construction material than a food item. Because fresh flour is expensive and prone to weevils, these biscuits are often made with the cheapest grade of wheat, mixed with water and a bit of saleratus, early baking soda, and baked until they are moisture-free and hard as granite. To eat one, you don't just bite into it. If you did, you'd risk shattering a molar. You have to dunk it. You submerge the biscuit into your bowl of grease or coffee, waiting for the bubbles to stop rising as the liquid slowly penetrates the hardened exterior. Even then, the center remains a gummy, flavorless paste that sticks to the roof of your mouth. Every chew is a reminder of the grit factor. There is no fiber here, no lightness, just a heavy, dense brick of carbohydrates that will sit in your stomach like a stone for the rest of the day. Then there is the coffee. In every Western film, there is a blue speckled pot perpetually bubbling over a campfire. The characters drink it with a look of rugged satisfaction. But your first sip tells a different story. Actual coffee beans are a luxury. Most frontier coffee is stretched or entirely replaced by whatever the settler can find. You might be drinking a concoction of roasted chicory, acorns, or even burnt bread crusts ground into a powder. If you are lucky enough to have real beans, they were likely bought green and roasted in a frying pan until they were scorched black on the outside and raw in the middle. The brewing method is simple. You toss a handful of grounds into a pot of water and boil it. Not steep it, not filter it. You boil it until the tannins are so concentrated, the liquid looks like motor oil and tastes like a battery. It is bitter beyond modern comprehension. To clear the grounds, some folks toss a crushed eggshell into the pot, hoping the calcium will drag the silt to the bottom. More often than not, you simply learn to teeth filter your drink, straining the gritty remains of the beans through your front teeth as you swallow. It is a staggering dose of caffeine and acid that hits your empty stomach with the force of a physical blow. Next comes the protein. Fresh meat is a rarity on the frontier unless you've spent your morning hunting. Most days, you eat salt pork. This is pork that has been cured in barrels of brine so thick an egg could float in it. To prepare it, the salt pork must be sliced thin and fried. As it hits the pan, it doesn't smell like breakfast sausage. It smells like pure, concentrated sodium. The salt crystals are still visible on the rind. Eating this day after day creates a condition known as salt pork fatigue. Your body begins to crave anything that isn't brine-soaked. Because of the salt content, your thirst becomes unquenchable. A cruel irony in a landscape where water is scarce. The texture is the real challenge. The meat is often fibrous and stringy. Without modern dentistry, many people are already missing several teeth by their late 20s. Trying to gnaw through a piece of tough, salt-cured rind with missing molars is a slow, painful process. Every meal is a reminder of your own physical decline. But the true grit factor of the Wild West diet is what isn't on the plate. There is no orange juice. There are no fresh greens. There is no fruit. We often associate scurvy with sailors on the high seas, but it was a silent killer of the American frontier. Without vitamin C, your body literally begins to come apart at the seams. Old scars begin to open up. Your gums become soft, spongy, and prone to bleeding at the slightest touch. Your teeth begin to loosen in their sockets. As you sit at your rough-hewn table, you might notice a faint, metallic taste in your mouth, the taste of your own bleeding gums. You are suffering from hidden hunger. You are eating enough calories to survive the labor, but your body is starving for nutrients. This lack of fresh produce leads to a general malaise, a crushing fatigue that makes every step feel like you're walking through mud. If you aren't at home and decide to eat at a restaurant in a frontier town, the situation isn't much better. Most establishments serve the standard: a plate of greasy beans, a piece of tough beef, and a biscuit. There is no ordering off the menu. You eat what the cook made that morning, which has likely been sitting in a pot at the back of the stove for hours. Food safety is a non-existent concept. The grit factor here is literal. Dust from the unpaved streets blows through the open doors and settles on your plate. Flies, drawn by the smell of grease and the lack of sanitation, are your constant dining companions. You spend half your meal swiping them away from your mouth. By the time you finish your breakfast, you don't feel nourished. You feel full, but in a heavy, uncomfortable way. Your mouth is dry from the salt, your stomach is acidic from the boiled coffee, and your jaw aches from the effort of chewing. You stand up, and the caffeine surge masks the underlying exhaustion for a moment. But deep down, you know that your body is running on fumes. In the Wild West, breakfast wasn't the most important meal of the day because of its health benefits. It was a desperate act of refueling. You've put enough coal in the engine to get it moving, but as you step toward the door to face the brutal labor of the day, you realize that your diet is slowly killing you from the inside out. The vibe of a Wild West workday is not the cinematic montage of heroic struggle. It is the rhythmic, punishing sound of metal hitting stone and the relentless rasp of heavy canvas against raw skin. As you step out of your cabin, the sun hasn't even fully cleared the horizon, yet the heat is already beginning to shimmer off the dirt. In 1875, there is no such thing as ergonomics. There is no work-life balance. Your body is simply a biological machine. And on the frontier, it is a machine that is being run at maximum capacity until it inevitably breaks. You are likely dressed in heavy canvas or denim, fabrics chosen for their durability, not their comfort. In the dry desert heat, these clothes don't breathe. As you begin to sweat, the fabric stiffens with salt and grit, turning your trousers and shirt into something resembling fine grit sandpaper. Every movement, every swing of an axe, every lift of a hay bale, every step behind a plough creates a friction point. By midday, your inner thighs, armpits, and lower back are chafed raw, sometimes bleeding into the rough weave of your clothes. You don't have the luxury of stopping to tend to it. You simply keep moving, the salt from your sweat stinging the open sores, a constant, low-level physical agony that you eventually learn to tune out. Whether you are a farmer, a miner, or a ranch hand, the labor is backbreaking, in the most literal sense of the word. Take the life of a sodbuster, a farmer on the Great Plains. You aren't just planting seeds, you are battling a prehistoric mat of tangled grass roots that have never been disturbed. To break the sod, you must lean your entire weight into a heavy iron plough, struggling to keep the blade deep in the earth, while fighting the lateral pull of a team of oxen or horses. The vibration of the plough hitting stones travels through the wooden handles and directly into your wrists, elbows, and shoulders. Do this for 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and the results are catastrophic. By the time a frontier labourer reaches their 30th birthday, their body tells the story of the land. Spinal discs are compressed, leading to a permanent, hunched posture. Shoulders are perpetually slumped, and joints are swollen with a premature, aggressive form of arthritis. On the frontier, a 35-year-old man often has the skeletal age of a 60-year-old in the modern world. You can see it in the way the veterans of the West walk. A stiff, rolling gait that betrays a dozen different untreated micro-fractures and ligament tears. If you chose the path of the miner, the physical destruction is even more specialized. You spend your day in a cramped, airless shaft, often swinging a 4-pound single jackhammer against a steel drill bit. Every strike sends a shockwave through your skeletal structure. The grit factor here is internal. You are breathing in a constant cloud of fine rock dust, silica, which settles into your lungs. Over months and years, this dust creates scar tissue, a condition known as silicosis or miner's consumption. Your breath becomes shallow, your chest feels like it's being squeezed by iron bands, and you develop a wet, rattling cough that never leaves you. In the dark of the mine, your only cooling is the damp, stagnant water dripping from the ceiling, which is often laced with arsenic or lead from the surrounding ore. Your skin absorbs these toxins, leading to tremors and a grey complexion that marks you as a dead man walking. Even the glamorous life of a cowboy is a slow-motion disaster for the human frame. You spend 12 to 16 hours a day in a saddle that, despite being made of leather, offers no real suspension. The constant jarring of a horse's gait, especially the high-stepping trot of a working cow pony, wreaks havoc on the lower back and knees. Rodeo historians and medical researchers have noted that the constant microconcussions from riding over uneven terrain led to early onset neurological issues for many cowboys. Then there are the acute injuries. A horse trips in a gopher hole, or a steer turns sharply, and suddenly you have a compound fracture. In 1875, there is no physical therapy. A broken leg that isn't set perfectly, and it rarely is, means you will walk with a limp that throws your hips out of alignment, leading to chronic, agonizing nerve pain for the rest of your life. The destruction isn't just physical. The labor is performed in a vacuum of isolation. On a frontier homestead, you might go weeks without speaking to another human being outside of your immediate family. This led to a documented phenomenon known as prairie madness. The psychological toll of the 14-hour grind combined with the relentless whistling wind of the plains, a wind that never stops, day or night, could break a person's mind. The sensory deprivation of the vast, flat landscape, where the horizon never changes no matter how hard you work, created a sense of dreadful eternity. You aren't just tired, you are existentially exhausted. You begin to hallucinate sounds in the wind, or you find yourself staring at a single point on the wall for hours, unable to summon the will to pick up again. Perhaps the cruelest part of frontier labour is the lack of downtime. There is no weekend. Livestock must be fed every day. Water must be hauled every day. The woodpile must be replenished every day. Even rest is labour. If a tool breaks, you don't buy a new one. You spend your evening hours at a forge or with a draw knife, repairing it by candlelight. The exhaustion is cumulative. It settles into your marrow, a deep-seated fatigue that sleep cannot touch. You wake up more tired than when you went to bed, your hands so stiff with trigger finger and callousness that you have to soak them in warm water just to be able to close them into a fist. The sun finally beginning to dip, you aren't thinking about the glory of the West. You are thinking about the sheer weight of your own limbs. You are a 28-year-old with the back of a coal heaver and the hands of a stone mason, and you realise that you aren't taming the land. The land is slowly, methodically, grinding you down into the dust. You've survived the day's labour, but the grit factor has claimed another piece of your vitality, a debt that can never be repaid. The vibe of 19th century medicine isn't the sterile, quiet sanctuary of a modern hospital. It is a sensory nightmare of copper-scented air, the stinging bite of carbolic acid, and the muffled, rhythmic rasp of a bone saw behind a thin wooden door. In 1875, getting shot in a dramatic duel is actually less common than dying from a simple splinter you picked up while hauling wood. On the frontier, the grit factor is never more terrifying than when it's under your skin. Imagine you're working on your cabin, and a jagged piece of pine slides deep into your palm. In the modern world, you'd grab a pair of tweezers and some antiseptic. In the Wild West, that splinter is a ticking time bomb. The real West doesn't care about your heroics. It cares about the bacteria living on that wood. Within 48 hours, your hand is twice its normal size, throbbing with a hot, sickly heat that pulses in time with your heart. You have the blood poisoning, what we now call sepsis, and your only hope is the town doctor. You stumble into town, your arm streaked with red lines, and find a small shingle hanging over a storefront. You need to understand that in the 1870s, the title of doctor was a loose term. Medical licensing was a joke, and many physicians on the frontier had learned their trade through a 6-month apprenticeship, or worse, a mail-order pamphlet. As you enter the office, the first thing you notice is the doctor himself. He is wearing a dark frock coat that is stiff with the dried fluids of every patient he has seen this week. To him, a blood-stained coat is a badge of experience, not a source of infection. He doesn't wash his hands when you walk in. Why would he? Germ theory, the revolutionary idea that microscopic organisms cause disease, is still a fringe theory being debated in Europe by men like Pasteur and Lister. To your frontier doctor, the idea that invisible bugs are killing you sounds like superstitious nonsense. He looks at your hand with a grimace. He doesn't reach for a sterilized needle. He pulls a pocket knife from his waistcoat, wipes it on his dirty trousers, and prepares to lance the wound. There is no lidocaine. There is no local anesthetic. If you're lucky, he pours a double shot of rot gut whiskey down your throat. The same stuff cut with turpentine we'll discuss later, and tells you to bite down on a piece of leather. The pain is white hot and blinding. As he works, you realize the instruments on his tray are encrusted with the laudable pus of previous patients. In 1875, doctors actually thought pus was a sign of healing rather than a sign of a localized infection. By trying to fix your splinter, he is likely introducing a cocktail of staph, strep, and tetanus directly into your bloodstream. If the infection doesn't clear, the doctor might resort to heroic medicine. This is a philosophy that believes the body needs to be shocked back into balance. This often involved bloodletting, the ancient practice of opening a vein with a phleem, a small spring-loaded blade, to drain out the bad humours. You sit in a chair, dizzy and feverish, as he drains a pint of your blood into a ceramic bowl. You feel the strength draining out of you, your vision blurring at the edges. To the modern mind, this is madness, bleeding an already weakened patient. But to the 1870s, mind, it's a standard cure for everything from pneumonia to a broken heart. If the bleeding doesn't work, he might move on to calomel. This was a popular medicine made of mercurous chloride. Yes, mercury. They would give you doses so high that your hair would fall out, your gums would turn black, and you'd begin to lose your teeth. The cure was often more lethal than the splinter itself. Finally, we reach the ultimate grit factor of frontier medicine, the amputation. If the infection turns to gangrene, the skin turning a mottled, bruised purple and smelling like rotting fruit, the doctor has only one tool left in his kit. You are strapped down to a wooden table. The doctor's assistant, likely the local blacksmith or a passing labourer, holds your shoulders. The doctor picks up a heavy, wide-toothed saw. Because he doesn't understand sterilisation, he might even sharpen the saw on the sole of his boot before he begins. The sound is something you will never forget. The wet, rhythmic rasping of steel through muscle, followed by the high-pitched, vibrating grind as it hits the bone. Without modern anaesthesia, the shock alone is enough to kill many patients. If you survive the surgery, you are left with a stump that is sewn shut with silk thread that hasn't been boiled, practically guaranteeing a second infection. If you avoid the doctor, you might turn to patent medicines. These were the colourful bottles sold by travelling salesmen who promised to cure everything that ails you. These bottles were the grit factor in liquid form. Most were a potent, unregulated mixture of high-proof alcohol, opium, cocaine, or even hemlock. You weren't getting cured, you were just getting so high that you didn't care your leg was rotting off. This led to a massive, hidden epidemic of addiction across the frontier. Thousands of respectable settlers were functionally opium addicts, their lives ruined by a bottle of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup or Clark's blood purifier. In the Wild West, the average lifespan was hovering around 35 to 40 years. This wasn't because everyone was dying in gunfights. It was because 1 in 4 women died in childbirth, and half of all children didn't make it to their 5th birthday. The invisible killers, cholera, smallpox, and the White Plague, tuberculosis, were the real outlaws of the frontier. You could be the toughest gunslinger in the territory, but a single sneeze from a traveller or a sip of water from a tainted well could end your story in a week of agony. As you leave the doctor's office, your hand bandaged in a piece of unwashed linen, and your head spinning from the loss of blood, you realize that the frontier is a biological minefield. The grit isn't just the dust on the road or the salt in your pork. It's the microscopic world that is constantly trying to reclaim your body. You've survived the splinter for now, but you know that in 1875, every day is a gamble with an opponent you can't see, can't fight, and certainly can't outrun. After the grueling physical destruction of the workday and the terrifying uncertainty of frontier medicine, you find yourself seeking the one thing the Wild West promised in every tall tale: a moment of respite. You head toward the center of town, drawn by the sound of a tinny piano and the yellow glow of lanterns. You are looking for the glamorous Western saloon. But as you push through the doors, the vibe is not one of cinematic grandeur. It is a sensory assault of stagnant air. The overwhelming stench of horse manure tracked in from the street, and a thick blue haze of cheap tobacco smoke that makes your already irritated eyes sting. The Hollywood Saloon is a place of polished mahogany, sparkling mirrors, and crystal glassware. The reality of 1875 is a mirage built on dirt and desperation. Most frontier saloons were little more than rectangular shacks with a rough-sawn plank laid across two barrels to serve as a bar. The floor isn't a dance hall. It's covered in old, beer-soaked sawdust meant to soak up the grit factor, a polite term for the saliva, spilled drink, and mud that accumulates throughout the night. Before you even reach the bar, you are greeted by the residents who never leave, the flies. Because there is no refrigeration and no sanitation system, the saloon is a magnet for insects. They swarm around the open barrels of sugar, the sticky rings on the tables, and the faces of the patrons. You spend your evening in a constant state of motion, swiping them away from your drink and your eyes. The smell is the next hurdle. It is a complex, nauseating layers of odors. The acidic tang of spilled beer that has begun to ferment in the floorboards, the musk of unwashed bodies in heavy wool, and the sharp chemical odor of the liquor itself. It doesn't smell like a fine spirit. It smells like a laboratory accident. You lay a coin on the damp wood and ask for a whiskey. What you receive in a chipped, cloudy glass is rarely whiskey by any modern definition. On the frontier, transport was expensive and regulation was non-existent. To maximize profits, saloon keepers would take a small amount of genuine alcohol and stretch it with whatever chemicals would give it a kick and a dark, convincing color. This was the rot-gut reality. The chemical cocktail served across the frontier was a cocktail of poisons. To give the drink a bite that simulated high-proof aging, barkeeps added chili peppers, ginger, or tobacco juice. To achieve the dark amber color of oak-aged spirits, they utilized burnt sugar, molasses, or even iodine. But the truly dangerous additives were used to provide the extra kick that desperate men craved. It was not uncommon for frontier liquor to be cut with turpentine, ammonia, or even gunpowder. The most lethal addition was methyl alcohol, wood alcohol. While it provided an immediate, staggering intoxication, it was a profound neurotoxin. A single night of heavy drinking in a frontier saloon could, and often did, lead to permanent blindness, as the wood alcohol destroyed the optic nerves. If it didn't take your sight, the caustic nature of the turpentine and pepper would lead to internal bleeding and chronic stomach ulcers. When a cowboy complained that the drink burned all the way down, he wasn't complimenting the heat. He was describing his throat and stomach lining being physically damaged. You look around for a place to sit, but comfort is not a priority here. The chairs are mismatched, unstable, and often missing rungs. The entertainment is a far cry from a professional show. If there is a piano, it is likely out of tune from the extreme humidity and temperature shifts of the plains, played by someone who is being paid primarily in the very rock gut they are serving. There is a tension in the air that you won't find in modern bars. In a world where everyone is physically exhausted, nutritionally deficient, and potentially suffering from the toxic effects of their drink, tempers are razor thin. The grit factor of the saloon is the constant threat of impulsive, messy violence. It isn't the dramatic, choreographed fight of a movie. It is a sudden, clumsy eruption of frustration over a perceived slight or a disputed card game. As you finish your drink, your throat raw and your head beginning to throb from the chemical impurities, you realize the cost. A single drink might cost a laborer 2 hours worth of back-breaking work. The saloon was designed to extract every last cent from the men who built the West. Many workers would receive their week's pay and lose it all in a single Friday night, half to the chemical cocktail and half to a game of faro or poker, where the house always held the advantage. The saloon mirage was a crucial part of frontier survival, but not because it offered safety. It offered an escape. It was the only place where the darkness of the prairie was held back by a few lanterns, and where the silence of the 14-hour grind was drowned out by noise. But as you step back out into the muddy street, your stomach churning and your vision slightly blurred, you realize that the respite of the saloon was just another way the Wild West tried to kill you. You haven't found relaxation. You've just traded the physical ache of the field for the chemical ache of the bottle. The vibe of a Wild West town is rarely the cinematic image of two steel-eyed men facing off on a deserted main street at high noon. Instead, it is an atmosphere of hushed, anxious whispers and the awkward, heavy weight of a sidearm slapping against your hip. A tool you likely don't know how to use, and one that the law might actually forbid you from carrying. In 1875, the quick draw wasn't a legendary skill. It was a fast track to an unmarked grave or a cold jail cell. In the movies, the protagonist walks into a saloon, his holster tied low to his thigh, and everyone gives him a wide berth. In the reality of the frontier, if you walked into a town like Dodge City, Abilene, or Tombstone with a visible firearm, you wouldn't be feared. You would be arrested. One of the greatest subversions of the Wild West myth is the historical fact of municipal gun control. As frontier towns grew, the citizens were desperate to shed their reputation for lawlessness to attract businesses and families. To do this, they enacted some of the strictest gun laws in American history. When you approached the limits of a major cattle town, you were often met by a large sign instructing you to check your guns. You were required by law to drop your revolvers and rifles at the sheriff's office or the local hotel, where they would be stored in a lockbox until you were ready to leave town. Carrying a weapon inside city limits was a misdemeanor that could result in a heavy fine or a stint in the stocks. Even the famous gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, was not a duel over honor or cattle. It was fundamentally a law enforcement action. The Earp brothers were attempting to enforce a city ordinance that prohibited the carrying of firearms within town limits. The violence erupted because a group of men refused to comply with local gun control. If you did find yourself in a situation where you had to use a weapon, you would quickly realize that the fastest gun in the West trope is a physical impossibility for the average person. The standard sidearm of the era, such as the single-action army revolver, was a heavy, unbalanced piece of iron. These weapons were not hair-triggered precision instruments. They were clunky and prone to accidental discharge. In fact, most seasoned frontiersmen carried their revolvers with the hammer resting on an empty chamber. This was because a sudden jolt, like jumping off a horse or a drunken stumble, could cause the firing pin to strike a primer, resulting in the wearer accidentally shooting themselves in the foot or leg. This accidental self-injury was far more common than winning a duel. Furthermore, marksmanship was abysmal. Black powder ammunition produced a thick, blinding cloud of white smoke with the first shot, obscuring the target immediately. Most gunfights weren't showdowns, they were fights in a fog. Men would fire wildly at shadows, often hitting innocent bystanders, horses, or the dirt, until their cylinders were empty. The honourable duel is a total fabrication of 20th century dime novels and film. In the real 1870s, if someone wanted you dead, they didn't meet you in the street. They waited in a dark alleyway and shot you in the back. Or they fired a shotgun through your window while you were eating dinner. Violence was impulsive, messy, and almost always fueled by the rot-gut liquor we discussed in the previous chapter. It happened over a disputed card in a dark room where the visibility was poor and the participants were intoxicated. There was no counting to 3, no dramatic music, and very little skill. It was a chaotic scramble for survival that left the survivors with a lifetime of legal trouble and the deceased with a shallow hole in Boot Hill. The lawmen tasked with stopping this violence. The marshals and sheriffs were rarely the flawless heroes of legend. Often, the line between lawman and outlaw was a revolving door. A man might be the sheriff of one county this year and a horse thief in the next territory by the following spring. These men weren't looking for a fair fight. Their job was to maintain order by any means necessary. They relied on posses, temporary groups of armed citizens, who often functioned more like a state-sanctioned mob, a disciplined police force. Justice was swift and often lacked anything resembling due process. If you were caught with a stolen horse, you didn't wait for a trial, you waited for a sturdy tree limb. You realized that the grit factor of frontier law wasn't about justice. It was about control. The sidearm at your hip feels like a liability, a piece of cold metal that is more likely to get you arrested or accidentally wounded than it is to save your life. You look at the no guns sign hanging near the livery stable and realize that the Wild West was trying to civilize itself, one confiscated revolver at a time. The real danger wasn't the man with the fast hands. It was the unpredictability of a world where everyone was scared, everyone was armed, and no one knew how to use the power they were holding. The sun begins its final, dramatic descent, bleeding a bruised purple and burnt orange across a horizon that seems to stretch into infinity. In the movies, this is the golden hour, a time for reflection and campfire songs. But as the light fails in 1875, the vibe shifts from the frantic heat of labor to something much more cold and oppressive. It is the arrival of a darkness so absolute, it feels like a physical weight pressing against your chest. This is the Great Silence. And it is here that you realize the true antagonist of the Wild West wasn't a man with a gun. It was the vast, crushing emptiness of the land itself. In our modern world, We have forgotten what true darkness looks like. We live in a cocoon of light pollution, where the night is merely a dimmer version of the day. But on the frontier, when the sun slips below the rim of the world, the light doesn't just fade, it vanishes. If there is no moon, you cannot see your own hand 6 inches from your face. The grit factor of the night is the total loss of your most trusted sense. You are left alone with your hearing, and in the silence of the plains, every sound is magnified into a threat. The silence isn't empty. It is punctuated by sounds that remind you of your own insignificance. You hear the rhythmic, dry skittering of a beetle across the dirt floor. You hear the structural groan of your cabin as the timber contracts in the plummeting temperature. And then, from somewhere out in the blackness, comes the sound that defines the frontier night, the long, oscillating howl of a coyote. It is a lonely, haunting sound that seems to echo the very hollowness of the landscape. It is joined by another, then another, until the night is filled with a ghostly chorus. It serves as a reminder that while you have claimed this small patch of earth, you do not own it. You're merely an intruder in a world that belongs to the wind and the predators. As you sit by the dying embers of your hearth, the psychological weight of your isolation begins to settle in. In the daylight, work keeps the mind busy. In the dark, the math of survival becomes inescapable. You are 50 miles from the nearest settlement. If you are lucky, that town might have a doctor like the one we met. But 50 miles in 1875 isn't a 40-minute drive. It is a 2-day journey by wagon, assuming the weather holds and the horse doesn't throw a shoe. This is the grit factor of the mind. You realize that out here, there is no safety net. There is no emergency whistle to blow. No neighbor who can hear your cry for help. A single mundane accident, a broken leg from a fall, a burst appendix, or an infected tooth is no longer a medical inconvenience. It is a death sentence. You're living in a world where the margin for error is 0. History books often talk about the rugged individualism of the West, but they rarely mention the frontier dread that came with it. Many settlers, particularly those living in the extreme isolation of soddy houses on the plains, suffered from profound depression. The sheer scale of the landscape, where the sky is so much larger than the earth, can make a person feel like they're disappearing. This was the great silence, not just of the air, but of the soul. You look at the small candle on your table. In 1875, light is a finite resource. Tallow candles are expensive or time-consuming to make, and coal oil for lamps is a luxury you use sparingly. When that flame goes out, you are plunged back into the void. You realize how much of your modern toughness relies on the flick of a switch. The fire in the hearth is your only shield against the plummeting high desert temperature. As the embers fade to a dull, pulsating red, the chill of the night begins to creep through the cracks in the floorboards and the gaps in the window shutters. You wrap yourself in a heavy wool blanket, scratchy, smelling of old grease and wood smoke, and realize that you are just a few degrees of heat away from disaster. If the winter is harsh enough and your woodpile runs low, the Wild West will simply reclaim you, turning your cabin into a cold wooden tomb. As you close your eyes and try to ignore the itching of the bedbugs in your straw mattress, you reflect on the journey we've taken. You wouldn't survive a day in the Wild West because you weren't built for it. Your body isn't accustomed to the 14-hour grind. Your stomach isn't ready for the salt pork and rot gut. Your mind isn't prepared for the crushing weight of the silence. The people who did survive weren't the granite-jawed heroes of the silver screen. They were exhausted, malnourished, and often terrified people who simply refused to stop moving. They lived in a world of grit, grease, and bone-deep fatigue, where every morning was a battle and every night was a tentative truce with the darkness. The Wild West wasn't won with a fast draw or a dramatic speech. It was endured. It was survived one bitter cup of coffee and one back-breaking row of crops at a time. And as the last glow of the embers disappears, leaving you in the absolute heavy blackness of 1875, you realize that the greatest luxury of the modern world isn't technology or wealth. It's the ability to close your eyes and know with absolute certainty that you will wake up tomorrow. The road is long, the fire is out, and the prairie is finally still. We've traveled far enough through the dust and the shadows for one night. It's time to let the great silence take over and find the rest that the frontier so often denied. Sleep well. Good night.